So you have heard a lot about the Millennium Development Goals. Now we had a transition from Millennium Development Goal to Sustainable Development Goals, right? So can you let me know what kind of such agenda have you heard? Anything, any other agenda have you heard in relation to sustainability? There are lots of different agenda, right? Have you heard about some of those other agenda? Are you aware of this kind of development agenda? Access to modern energy is one of the targets of SDG 7, right? So what I was saying is that have you heard many other agenda other than SDGs? The Agenda 21 was the agenda that was put forward much before Millennium Development Goals, right? There are a lot of Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was quite a popular agenda, few decades back. Similarly, there are many other agenda. They have evolved. Some of those are overarching, like Agenda 21 or SDGs. They are very overarching, and some agendas are more sector specific. For example, there is something called New Urban Agenda, right? New Urban Agenda was a result of the Habitat 3 conference in the city of Quito that took place in 2016. So New Urban Agenda is a agenda related to urbanization, but it is also the similar kind of agenda. So what I'm trying to say here is that you have got lots of those agenda. Some are overarching in nature, which sets for a long course. For example, MDG or SDG try to be overarching, but there are some other agenda which are sector specific, such as some for the biological diversity, something for urbanization, something to address particular type of pollution. For example, ozone depletion. There are some other agenda, as the Paris Agreement and some of the climate agenda is runs on parallel. So there are lots of sectoral agenda also, in addition to some of the bigger overarching agenda that you see around. Now, but what I would like to emphasize here is that please understand the difference between sustainability itself and sustainable agenda. I already said that sustainability is our aim, is our aspiration. We want to create the sustainable society, sustainable world that can be defined in many different ways. But often, sustainable development agenda is a pathway to reach to that state of sustainability, or sustainable development agenda help us to operationalize our move towards that aim or aspiration, which is sustainability, right? So that's why I said that the political agenda or the international politics or the international collective effort set those goals. That's why this, SDG, MDG, even you have heard perhaps about the Kyoto Protocol for climate change in the past, or even Paris Agreement. These are politically negotiated goals, and one can always question whether these politically negotiated sustainable development agenda are actually good enough or not. Do they do enough justice to the fundamental aspiration for the sustainability? So you can always ask that a question. Just to illustrate my point. Why I said it is that if you look at United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, we call it, right? The ultimate objective of UNFCCC is to avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference to the climate system, right? Now, how much is, the word is that dangerous anthropogenic interference to the climate system. Now, the question always comes, how much is dangerous, right? Even in case of climate change, for a long time, we said that 2 degrees Celsius. Then in Paris Agreement, we talked about 1.5 degrees Celsius. So there also you can ask question whether 1.5 degree target is actually good enough for our sustainability or not, right? So those kind of questions you can always make, because many of these sustainable development agendas have to be politically negotiated. And when you have to politically negotiate those agenda, then in order to keep everybody happy, in order to make sure that something implementable, you have to have a lot of compromises, right? And sometimes those compromises are made just to keep the momentum going, although those agenda or those target itself may be less relevant. One such example is Kyoto Protocol, right? For example, when the goal of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, ultimate objective to reduce the dangerous anthropogenic interference in the climate system, you can question then the third meeting of consensus parties of UNFCCC COP3 in Kyoto. They adopted Kyoto Protocol, and the target of Kyoto Protocol was quite nominal. Target of Kyoto Protocol was that developed countries, right? Developed countries will reduce collectively their emission by around 5%, 5-6% by 2012 compared to their baseline in 1990. But you can always ask the question whether that was enough. No, that small reduction in CO2 emission, greenhouse gas emission under Kyoto Protocol was meaningless. Climate, from the physical science level, that was quite meaningless. That even won't change the CO2 concentration in any meaningful way in the atmosphere. But that was important because that was politically negotiated agenda. That was important because that would galvanize countries to work together, right? So, for example, in case of Kyoto Protocol, there was no any targets for developing country. The target was only for developed country, right? At that time, it was necessary to bring developing country also along, and also creating some kind of atmosphere that everybody can work together. So the developed countries can help developing country, technology transfer, financial support, mechanisms such as clean development mechanism, CDM. So lots of things were possible. So that really, although Kyoto Protocol 5.2% reduction itself was meaningless from the physical science perspective, but still that agenda was important to move us forward. So what I'm trying to say here is that there is a distinction between politically negotiated sustainable development agenda and the true aspirations, and not always our true aspirations, what we need to do, where we need to be, not necessarily it is always fully covered in the political agenda, right? So that's why whether the SDGs will help us to bring to the path of sustainability, planet Earth, has to be, safe operating space for the planet Earth. Whether SDG will really meet that goal, you can always ask question. And again, SDG is only for 2030, but our sustainability quest is for long term, right? So there are some differences between sustainable agenda versus sustainability. I hope that was clear to you. Now let me also, in the discussion, share with you what did we do in terms of this global agenda, global sustainable agenda over the years. What has been the evolution and the major milestone? There are lots of initiatives in 1970s regarding environmental initiative, right? So 1970s, of course, much before 1970, we knew about for example, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which sometimes we call as a kneeling curve. The kneeling curve, right? CO2 concentration, moving up and down, and then concentration. So even long time back, scientists such as Roger Rivelle and others, they have suggested that human greenhouse gas emission might be creating greenhouse gas effect and ultimately causing global warming. There are a lot of scientific information accumulating in 1950s, 1960s, but around 1970s, that there were lots of things happened. United Nations Environmental Program was initiated in 1970s because we were increasingly recognizing the need to address environment, and the environmental issues were coming into the very much forefront. Similarly, for example, in United States, US EPA was established in 1970s. Then in 1972, there was Stockholm Conference, which is called UN Conference on Human Development. Now they have created lots of movement, as I said earlier, like a UNEP, and also that led into the environmental consciousness awareness, and it led into the formulation of many environmental legislations, regulations. And if you look at the 1970s, many countries, started instituting environmental, legislations, regulations to really deal with environment. So the movement has really started. Then in 1982, this 10 years after the Stockholm conference, which took place in 1972, this more and more environmental institutions were established. They were, strengthened, and also, the formulation of environmental legislations across the world really prospered. Even many new kind of UN conventions were put into place, whether in sea, whether in, slowly in UNFCCC, desertification, biodiversity, so many different conventions really started. I was earlier talking about kneeling curve. So, this is a CO2 concentration, and the scientists have, really told us that world environment is a problem, climate change is a problem, biodiversity is a problem, all these things. So this 70 is a very crucial moment in this whole environmental, discourse. Lots of things happen regarding environment sustainability in 1970s. Now, one major report that came out, I think many of you might already might have heard, is so-called the report Our Common Future. It's called Brundtland Commission's report, Our Common Future. Now, there the concept of sustainable development has been put forward. So that report defined sustainable development as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So for the first time, very explicitly, intergenerational equity has been put forward there also. Then also, need for integrating environment into the macro operation, and also bringing down environment and this sustainable development consideration towards the sectoral policies and the sectoral operation at the different level of governance, at the level of national government, at the level of local governments. Those were started to be discussed very, very actively. Then we have a big moment in 1992. It's called Rio de Janeiro, Rio Earth Summit. Now there we had a major breakthrough in number of areas. So that particular this Rio Earth Summit brought very, very strong environmental elements to this political agenda of the governments. Then their nations, the countries, are committed to the implementation of so-called Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was a prime vehicle to help move us towards sustainable development, which was kind of propounded in Our Common Future, this 1987 Brundtland Commission report. Then also 1992 was also a very important time. There so many other framework conventions has been put into place. For example, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, was put for signature there together with two other sister conventions, UNCBD, United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and also United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification. So lots of those things happened, and also there was an agreement there on the basic principles for managing and conserving world's forests. So you can see that 1992 Earth Summit was a very important milestone where lots of things happened and lots of environmental movement was kind of consolidated and put forward in the form of some kind of action through that Rio Earth Summit. Now, of course, there are many other things happens. As I mentioned, convention to combat desertification. These conventions, have their own rule. If you know international, how these conventions work. For example, even for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, country can sign, but only certain percentage of the country ratify that from the respective parliament. Then only that enters into the force. So sometimes, although UNFCCC was signed, put for signature in Rio conference, but it actually came into force little later after that requirement is met. In the international law, there is certain requirement. After meeting that requirement, only that particular convention is officially become active. Then this convention on combating desertification was active. Then, of course, UNFCCC was already active. Then, often in many of these, framework conventions, for example, they have conventions. Then after that, the parties to that convention start meeting every year, and those are usually called COP meetings. For example, in case of UNFCCC, the COP3 in the Kyoto I mentioned to earlier, established the first time legally some kind of legally binding obligations for developed countries to mitigate their greenhouse gas emission. As I said earlier, it was 5.2% collectively reduction by 2012 from their level in 1990, right? For the first time. Then, of course, then you have this overarching frameworks are there. Then this world WSSD in Rio +10 2002 was also one important event. Stockholm Convention on POPs, this is organic pollutants, prospective organic pollutants, POPs in 2004. Then you have already know about the climate change and United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. There are many things happened to push the climate agenda, and climate agenda started taking in the center of the many sustainability agenda. Then there is a report called Eastern Review done which was commissioned by the Treasury Department in UK, try to understand the economics of climate change. That again meeting was very important because that Eastern Review galvanized lots of attention to climate change. And in 2009, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there's a meeting in Copenhagen that committed establishment of the Green Climate Fund, which is $100 billion per year support to the developing country by developed country. So that was initiated from the UNFCCC. So that was also part of the development agenda, right? Now, then there's a series of many other developments happen. For example, declaration on the green growth. In 2009, OECD ministers had this declaration on the green growth. So the idea is to pursue green growth strategy, and the growth has to be green, right? Unlike the previous paradigm, grow first grow first, grow first and forget other things. But green growth was put into the agenda. Then again, in this part of the world, in Asia, in 2010, there was something called Incheon Declaration on Green Growth, which was formalized by the UN SCAP. So now this initiative tried to put green into the agenda while discussing the growth strategies. And there's a lot of things happened during that time. Try to see green growth as the way to move forward, and in different regions, whether ASEAN or in other country, people use this word green growth as a some kind of place where to galvanize efforts and the thoughts and then move forward. Similarly, in 2010, there are again many others, as I said, the sectoral agenda, which also assists the overarching agenda. This Aichi biodiversity targets and Nagoya Protocol. So these were very ambitious targets on biodiversity, and also the things like the access to genetic resources, and also the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from utilization of these genetic resources and biodiversity. So these conventions, these kind of declarations, these kind of agenda also went parallel, because these are a bit of a sectoral kind of agenda. Then other one event, we have been putting Rio de Janeiro 1992 as a milestone. Then we have been telling Rio +10, Rio +20. That was a kind of 10-year benchmark after the Rio conference of 1992. Then there is a UNCST or Rio +20 conference. And now that conference was very vital, because that conference had one outcome document. It's called The Future We Want, right? So that report was very important in a sense that it propounded the green economy as a basis. So the economy must have must be green. So that particular dimension was very strongly put forward. There is a agreement or suggestion to make very strong environmental portfolio. For example, stronger UNEP and other environmental agency on the corporate sector, corporate social responsibility, and over the years now that has evolved into ESG, environment, social, and governance. A lot of discussion started there regarding beyond GDP. I think GDP is one of the indicators, right? GDP is an indicator which look after total production of goods and services, total final goods and services production inside the economy. And often we use GDP as a measure for growth, economic growth. But there are a lot of discussion also started beyond GDP. And also a lot of sustainable development financing strategy was discussed there at that time. And the need for ocean sustainability, need for marine ecosystem, their role on biodiversity and sustainability, this got a recognition. And also a lot of discussion about sustainable consumption and production, SCP. So 10-year framework was created. Now, what is the most important part of this 2012 Rio +20 conference was commitment to the process to come up with new targets, overarching targets. And that time in 2012, they aimed that by 2015, countries will work in order to agree to a new ambitious targets that is to be called SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, right? Before SDG, there was something called Millennium Development Goals. So Millennium Development Goals target was from 2000 to 2015. So in 2012, this Rio +20 conference agreed that in next 3 years, that means by 2015, world will work in order to agree to a new sustainable development targets. And that milestone was supposed to be 2025, because as you know that there are lots of negotiations needed, right, to agree to this kind of targets. So the target was put that, okay, by 2015, we'll come up with new development target for the world, right? Then finally, that was successful. In 2015, we had SDG, but in between, we had many other so-called, sectoral, development agenda. For example, Minamata Convention. Minamata Convention was to control the mercury and mercury-related compound. So how to control that? Heavy metals were major issue. So but finally, this 2015 was kind of milestone, right? Milestone in the sense that we worked on Millennium Development Goal, from 2000. So, but Millennium Development Goals target was till 2015. So before that year is reached in 2012, during Rio Plus 20, countries agreed that by 2015, they will put forward new target for world to achieve. So that was a kind of sequence of this agenda setting process. Now, you might have heard a lot about the Millennium Development Goal, right? Which was before SDG. So Millennium Development Goals had certain goals, and of course there was some evaluation whether the world achieved some of the goals set as a Millennium Development Goal or not. Have you heard about the Millennium Development Goals?